Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope you're doing well today. I have decided to continue on with my Tales from the Crypt series ranking videos, and for this installment, we're going to be looking at Season 6. Now, Season 6 is the second longest season of the entire show. It's 15 episodes, and I have to say, this is the point of the show that I found myself in while watching these, that I started to realize that the show was losing a lot of steam. And I feel like at this point, they were probably dipping into whatever they had left, like the bottom of the barrel to, I guess, throw out there. And I'm going to be honest, this season was hella mid. There are some people who kind of like this season for feeling weird, and there are some different feeling episodes in this season compared to other episodes prior and the previous 5 seasons that make it stand out, but I think it's for the wrong reasons. But I will say this, Season 6 does have a few gems that I really enjoyed. Basically, my top 3 or 4 are like full-on good. But the rest, mild spoiler, fall below that. And we're talking decent or less. And if you haven't watched my videos in the past and how I do these rankings, I have certain criteria I look at starting from the bottom. Genuinely awful, bad, meh, okay, decent, good, very good, great, and perfect. Now, there was 4 categories that got 0 entries. Genuinely awful and bad, so it doesn't really have any terrible episodes in my opinion. That might be a hot take for some of you out there, because I know a lot of people hate a good amount of these episodes and say it's some of the worst of Crypt. I get it, but nothing really too offensive for me. That made me hate it or anything. And then there was no great or perfect. So we're looking at very good to meh range. And since we have 15 episodes, we might as well go ahead and start off. We have 3 mehs to go over. So at number 15, I should mention this also. All 3 of these are on my bottom 10 of the show. So take that for what you will. But it's like numbers 10, 9, 8, 7 range, right? So at number 15, we have episode 75, In the Groove. This came from Crime Suspense Stories number 21, and I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. This is a pretty low meh. I think it was the lowest meh I gave in the whole show. Honestly, I don't really understand what the fuck they were trying to do with this one. It's narratively all over the place. It's confusing pretty much for the sake of it. There is one clever aspect to it, but other than that, this episode is a complete wash. Kind of like majority of this season. But the concept is, this radio host, he's kind of weird. He likes to do like sex fantasy bullshit on the airways with this co-host of his. And he works for this radio station that used to be owned by his mother, but since she's passed away in her inheritance, she gave controlling interest to his older sister or something, and she lets him be the host. Well, since he's producing poor ratings, she decides that they're going to get rid of him, essentially, and replace him. And he doesn't want to get replaced, so he starts doing a little more risque stuff, and it starts off the episode with like these weird visions, like, I guess, daydream bullshit, where he's having these sexual fantasies about his co-host or some shit. It's kind of bizarre, but nonetheless, they start amping up their show. They get good ratings, but then he gets a little over his head, and he tries to do something overstepping his sister, and pisses her off to the point where she's essentially going to fire him, full on, and just remove him. So he gets pissed, comes up with this harebrained idea to try to kill her, but of course it backfires, and then by the end, you realize who his replacement was going to be. That's really the only clever part about this story, and that's the only reason why I give it this high of a score. At least they had that in terms of story, with that clever reveal of his replacement. Other than that, yeah, like I said, narratively put together, it's all over the place. I guess there's some themes and messages about having, like, parent issues and, you know, the aftermath of losing a parent and leaving siblings together to divvy up what's left of their estate. That's kind of there. But yeah, nothing really too much to write home about this one. It's just very forgettable, honestly. And not one that I would recommend to any of you. Same goes for number 14. This one was super bizarre, too. This kind of felt way out of place, even for this show. We have episode 72, The Pit. And this comes from the Vault of Horror, number 40. And I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Honestly, the only real reason why I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars were for 2 reasons. There's a scene involving some gym equipment and involves some sex that was kind of hilarious, and it made me legitimately laugh. And Wayne Newton's in this. And seeing Wayne Newton outside of a movie like Vegas Vacation is fun. Other than that, don't really know what the fuck they were trying here. I guess this one was trying to be a little bit different. The concept is these 2 wives who are married to mixed martial artists or boxers or whatever. They're actually former fighters themselves, and they have kind of hung up their gloves so they can be wives and live vicariously through their husbands, because the husbands in male sports are the things that get attention. Well, there's this new show idea led by Wayne Newton and this television company where their husbands are going to have this, I think it's some like Southeast Asian death match. I forget the country they mentioned, or is it Malaysian? I forget what it is, but essentially they're gonna have a fight to the death, and the wives are like talking up their husbands, and they can't wait for this debacle. But the husbands kind of catch on and realize that maybe it's their wives wanting this to happen, so they encourage their wives to potentially do this with this plan, and they surprise it on them, and then the story ends before we find out what becomes of the results of the fight. Yeah, just super bizarre. The concept really doesn't have me all that much, if I'm being honest. I do see the themes of, fighting battles with other people and living vicariously through them. I like that idea, but it doesn't really play it up in an interesting way here. Majority of this episode is just nothing really happening. It's all build up to this fight at the end, and it's nothing but character drama, and these characters suck. So yeah. Whatever. It's a whatever thing. That's why it's a meh. Pretty low for that. And then at number 13, this one, I'm kind of still conflicted on, if I'm being honest. I really don't know what to think of it. I do enjoy some aspects to it. We have episode 73, The Assassin. And this comes from Shock Suspense Stories, number 17. And I gave this a 2.25 out of 5 stars. This episode, the only thing I can really remember it for is the concept. I felt that was kind of fun about it, and how the plot unfolds. And there's also an appearance from Corey Feldman, and I know he has some controversy going on around him because a lot of people are starting to point fingers because all this uncovering these days about these former celebrities or child celebrities have been coming, to the woodwork. With that aside, though, I thought this one had some potential, but where it ends. Yeah, it felt like a nut punch a little bit. But the concept of this one is that this husband and wife, they have this nice little home out in suburbs. And the husband goes off to do, I think, like a business trip or something, and leaves the wife at home. And then all of a sudden, these 3 like spy agents come busting through the home and essentially corner the woman, saying, "Hey, we're looking for your husband. We're convinced that your husband is this man, and he's wanted, and we need to get to him." And the wife's like, "Well, I'm not going to let you do that." And she's trying to like cover up for him and trying to stall the situation, but they don't seem to be happy with it. And they've pretty much tried to keep her a captive. But throughout the story, she finds herself in situations with these 3. And the 3 of them is actually led by a woman, which I thought was kind of cool in a change up. And the 2 lackeys were kind of dumb and dim-witted. There's like these accidental deaths that these people fall into that make her look kind of smart and kind of threatening. And then while that's actually fun, when you get to about the final 3 to 4 minutes of the story, there's a recontextualization about the husband and the person that we're looking for. And you don't see it coming. And honestly, it's a little too highbrow for my taste. It involves, I don't know how to put this. It's kind of like a similar twist to a cross-dressing killer. But here it's more played as the humorous joke that they were not conspicuous enough to pick up the breadcrumbs that maybe a certain person didn't register as that same person anymore. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, so that just took me out of the story a little bit. I love Crypt for being unorthodox sometimes, and I love it for being this platform to tell pervasive stories and make you think a little bit. This story doesn't really make you think all that much. There's not much substance, if at all, other than I guess you can look at it from the nuclear family archetype, where the stay-at-home wife has to wear the reputation of her husband when she's at home, and that kind of plays a role in the story because she's devoted to her husband. She doesn't want anything bad to happen to him. You get that through it, but other than that, there's not much to this one. So that's why it's here. It was fun when it was fun, but when it got bad, it was pretty bad. So there you go. That's why it evens out in a meh. All right, now we're going into the okay episodes, and we have 3 to discuss here. At number 12, we actually have the first episode of the season, episode 66, Let the Punishment Fit the Crime. This comes from the Vault of Horror, number 33, and I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. This one stars Catherine O'Hara, and I thought she did a fun performance. There's the guy that was one of the brothers in this movie I remember called Mousetrap, and I think he might have been in like the Bean movie from the 90s. I don't know his name, but these two had some fun performances. But the concept of this one is just very corny, and it almost feels like a Tales from the Dark Side episode more than a Crypt episode. And maybe if you're a fan of Dark Side, this might land for you more, but I really don't care for this all that much. The concept is this corrupt attorney who's like made money off personal injury lawsuits and all this gets pulled in this very strict town where essentially they take you to a courthouse and they have basically a court-appointed lawyer to represent you, and they're known to give extreme punishments out to people. And the corrupt attorney learns this, who's played by Catherine O'Hara, and she wants to represent herself, but there's this other lawyer that she has to deal with to take her case. And throughout the whole story, they go into a courtroom. They have these very strict judges and state prosecutor giving her like punishments like 100 lashings down in the dungeon. And then she tries to appeal her case, or her case gets appealed. She goes to another courtroom somewhere in the courthouse, and they give her some ridiculous punishment. And then she finds herself again appealing her case, having some altercations with her lawyer, saying that, you keep ruining this for me, blah, blah, blah. And he like uncovers dirt from her car for her to try to help her case, but makes things worse. So he's like a lovable idiot, I guess. Then finally she gets like this death sentence, right? And it comes to a reality in the story where she may or may not be haunted by some things that she did in her past. And this kind of plays into this reveal at the end where there might be some role reversal going on with the lawyer and the corrupt lawyer, let's just say. And that's where the story ends. And it ends on a very, very, very tongue-in-cheek, goofy note. It kind of made me cringe a little bit. But you do see that... I do see the symmetry that the courthouse basically represents a purgatory. And whatever person or hapless soul wanders into this, they're basically stuck there forever until they can find a way out. And the character knows the only way out by witnessing what happens. I can see that message in the story. I can definitely see the comeuppance for the main character for being corrupt and for being basically a piece of shit and money hungry. But aside from that, it's a little all over the place. It's definitely dependent on character dialogue and character interactions. The concept isn't really that intriguing. It almost feels like a cartoon episode from like Fairly Odd Parents. If you're into that, that might work for you. I can see if you love that show, you might love this in some ways, but yeah, not for me, Jack. So that's why it's here. All right, and number 11. Now this one had a lot of potential with its cast in aspects to the story, but it really, really, really fell apart. We have episode 71, The Bribe. This comes from Shock Suspense Stories number 7. And I gave this a 2.75 out of 5 stars. It's on the upper end of okay. This one is known to have Benicio del Toro in it in one of his earlier roles. It has the daughter from the Father of the Bride movies. And I think the dad played like Mr. Sinat in like this Disney Channel movie I recognize called Under Wraps. I think that's him. I could be mistaken. Looks a lot like him though. But other than recognizable actors here, the premise is more grounded, but there's a lot of dumb shit involving character decisions and information of the story that just makes no fucking sense. But it's essentially about this daughter of this, I think, police officer. She's taken a life of basically becoming a stripper, and she works at the strip club, and she may or may not have gotten in trouble at school, and she needed money to pay for her student loans. So her dad realizes that that's the wrong way, and he wants to help her and try to get her out of this situation when he finds out about it. So he confronts the strip club owner. He's like, well, she's not here. He ends up finding his daughter. Him and his daughter have this heart-to-heart, this understanding that some things will happen. But turns out that she might have gotten in way more trouble and in way over her head than he thought. And this may or may not involve another party that is maybe in the mafia or mobsters or part of a gang, let's just say. And there's an ending where the father basically gets faked out and something weird happens to the dad. It's very unfortunate, but by the end you realize that what the daughter did, she was basically abusing the lovable daughter and dad trope, and still living on the life of the edge, essentially, which is kind of fucked up. And yeah, this is one of the episodes where I think the story was riveting enough and it was entertaining, but where it ended made me full on hate some characters here. I think the wrong person got the short end of the stick of the story. And I don't even remember all the details because it's kind of forgettable in some aspects. But yeah, there's also some things that you kind of have to look past with the dad not knowing that his daughter needed help paying for school, and the daughter kind of lying about how she was paying for school, right? It just seems kind of far-fetched because at one point of the story, he's like, well, I want to help pay for your school. And it seems like maybe him and his daughter had this estranged relationship. But if you cared that much about her, wouldn't you just pay for her school up front? It's just stuff like that just don't make sense. But I do see the message from the dad of trying to make up for lost time, trying to save his daughter from making wrong life decisions. If you're a parent, I can kind of see how this story might resonate with you a little more. It kind of hits deep on that for that. But other than that, yeah, this one was just an okay one. It's not the most convincing episode story-wise, and yeah, it's nothing special. So there you go. Now to round out the okays, at number 10, we have an episode that I think is very polarizing. I've seen people say recently they really love this one, and this is a common one people say is one of the worst Tales from the Crypt episodes, and I think it's overhated by that side of the spectrum, but it's also not great either. So I don't see where people are coming from with this. It's episode 68, Whirlpool. This comes from the Vault of Horror number 32, and I gave this a 2.75 out of 5 stars. Look, this is one of those Groundhog Day type of stories, or not quite that, but a similar feeling, where a character lives different scenarios or similar scenarios, and let's just say sometimes there's different outcomes or expected outcomes, right? This concept is fairly simple to follow. This person who works for the Tales from the Crypt comics, right? This is another story similar to something like Corman's Calamity, which is very meta for the show, I guess. She, I guess, has some workplace issues because she's a woman, and you kind of see that commentary there, and they don't really try to take her seriously. But she has this phenomenon going on where basically, like the title would suggest, Whirlpool, she keeps getting thrown into these reality scenarios where all these fucked up shit are happening to her. And some of the fucked up shit is really cool. I'm just going to say there's something involving a room, and you'll see the room when you get to it. That was great stuff. But yeah, it's one of those stories that just hobble down. It's kind of like a dream within a dream story. If you like that setup, if you like that psychic mind melding shit, good for you. But yeah, it ends up in a meta fashion as well, and some asshole might get some comeuppance, essentially. Yeah, this one had a little more going for it than I think the one below it. I think there's some more memorable stuff here, even though a lot of it's escaping me because of how vapid the story presentation actually felt for me. Aside from the meta stuff, which I think is really fun for the show, aside from having the atypical woman character that you see in Crypt being kind of refreshing here, and aside from some, like I said, mentioned the commentary about women in the workplace and all that, not a lot to this one, and that's why it's here. All right, so now we're getting into the decent. All right, so these are full on decent. I think I have 5 episodes in this category to talk about. And at number 9, we have episode 74, Stared in Horror. This comes from the Vault of Horror, number 23, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Now, Stared in Horror is one that I wanted to love. It has Arlie Ermy in it. It has another actor. Why am I blanking on his name? He's been in a lot of things. And I thought it was really cool to see him here. And I think the concept is really fun. It's kind of unorthodox and entertaining at points. But then again, it does kind of lose me in its pace. And it does sadly feel a little bit padded. But nonetheless, the story is about this guy. He's on the run. He has this mob chasing after him. And he ends up finding this home of this elderly woman, and he's trying to get into the house and says, "Hey, please let me in. It's for my safety, for my own good." And he manages to convince her to let him in. But once she's inside, she seems to be kind of worried that he's there, and he's like, "Look, I gotta go hide out. Can I go upstairs?" And she's like, "No, you can't go upstairs." And he's like, "Why can't I go up the stairs?" She goes, "You won't believe me if I told you." So he hangs out around downstairs, tries to hide around. He's kind of pissed off, and you see this mob led by some police who is led by Arlie Ermy, asking the old woman if the guy is there. And she's like, "No, he's not." So she gets him to go away for a little bit, but at the same time, you kind of understand that the mom is convinced that this man is here, right? So once they go away for a little bit, the man and the old woman start talking, and there's this backstory about something that happened with her husband, and there may or may not be a curse on the staircase, and she shows him essentially what happens. And it comes to a point in the story where after he learns this thing about the staircase, and let's just say it may or may not involve aging you if you're a man, if you go up the stairs, or de-aging you if you're a woman, if you go down the stairs, comes a point where he feels compelled that he has to go upstairs because the mob is just getting too unruly, and he tries to run away, but he can't really do anything about it. And the ending is kind of weird because you don't really know what happens to him, but you can only imply because he keeps going on and on and on up to avoid some like dog or something. And yeah. So yeah, weird little concept, not really entertaining story-wise. There's not much substance here at all. It's just random plot with some goofy magic stuff that is kind of compelling, and that's about it. I thought the character performances was fun. I thought the effects were really good on the makeup, on some of these prosthetic works that were put on the actors. And I did think the ending was mildly chilling. Other than that, it was a low decent. I had a fine enough time with it. All right, at number 8, this story is Revenge is the Nuts. This was episode 70. This came from the Vault of Horror number 20 for the title, but it's actually based on a story called Blind Alleys and Tales from the Crypt number 44. So I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars as well. This has the wife from Meet the Parents in it. What is it, Pamela Fokker? Which I thought it was a really fun thing to see her in this. I don't know her name off the top of my head, but yeah, I liked her. She was a pretty good performance in this. I think the voice of Chef from South Park was in this, which was awesome. But the concept of this was different. Different enough, and it was kind of creepy, but it does have its icky moments that really weigh it down, and by the second half, it does kind of feel sluggish as hell. Well, the concept is this blind woman, she is sent, because she doesn't have much money, she's low income, she's sent to this agency or this house nearby some train tracks, where they're going to be her caregivers. And there's a bunch of other blind people in this home, but the place who runs it, it's this guy who, he's like this golfer, uppity, ritzy asshole. He has a Rottweiler by his side, and he has his brother, I guess, who he bosses around, that's kind of like the foreman. And the whole story, and I'm not bullshitting you, is this guy who runs this joint trying to put himself onto this blind woman. And since she was like refusing to like give herself to him, he punishes the rest of them, and he locks them all in the same room, where once an hour a train rolls by, shakes the room violently. They get fed once a day. They're left in total blackness at all times. And even one of them got attacked by the dog. They try to break through to the nice foreman and say, hey, look, you don't have to listen to your brother. You can help us. And you can see that confliction in the man. And it comes to a point where the woman decides that maybe she has to just give in to the guy, so maybe everybody else could benefit. So she entertains doing it, but there's a catch with it. So when she tries to do it, things go a little south, which pisses off the brother, who kind of maybe or maybe not has a crush on this woman. So they devise a plan, and they end up creating this labyrinth of a punishment for this man. And let's just leave it there, because I don't want to spoil too much there. But that's essentially the story. So yeah, this story kind of is coming to talk about how people with disabilities, like the blind, sometimes can be treated like mental patients. And you can see the commentary there with them feeling like inmates at the asylum when they shouldn't be in asylum. You could definitely see some class issues going on with like the poor and how they're treated to get one meal a day. They basically have nowhere else to go. And it's kind of a commentary on the caregiving industry in itself. There's a lot of layers to peel back with this. However, the icky bullshit about the guy trying to essentially force himself on this blind woman, it's a little bit too much. And it gets to the point, like by the second half of the story, once you get over that hurdle with the brother and him getting on board to help these people, there's legit a 5 to 7 minute stretch of nothing fucking happening. You just see this guy sitting in this room, banging on doors, trying to get out of this labyrinth. It's not even suspenseful. I mean, there are some things that are kind of cool, like maybe some nails sticking out of a wall, so if the train comes by, the walls shake, it can like pierce them. But it's just really fucking dull, and the story ends on a whimper. There's no punchline to it. I kind of wish it tied back to the themes a bit more. I don't think it really ended. This has a similar issue with some other episodes that I've seen, where it has a good premise, but it's kind of bogged down by pace or some silly shit, or they don't really wrap up the themes they had present in a nice bow in the message by the end. But for a little revenge story, I guess, hence why the title is Revenge is the Nuts, this was fine enough. It's a low decent, and I would recommend it. All right, at number 7, we have episode 76, Surprise Party. This comes from the Vault of Horror, number 37, and I also gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I know this is another hated episode of the show, and I can see why. I'm just kind of in the middle with it, almost exactly. I actually had a fun time with this by the end. There are a lot of logical inconsistencies, and I'll get into that in just a fucking moment, that make no goddamn sense, but it is what it is. So the concept of this one is pretty simple to follow. This man, he's driving on a road, and while he's driving, there is a fun little thing they try to do here stylistically, where they're telling an entire flashback in a windshield. And I thought that was cool as shit. Throughout the entire flashback, which honestly lasts almost 10 minutes of this fucking episode, we see this man interacting with his father on his deathbed, and there's some qualms about this property. And the guy essentially wants the property so when his dad dies, he can be the owner and he can do with it what he wants. But his father is telling him that it's no good. It's nothing but bad memories there. You need to stay away from the property. I'm going to donate it. Please trust me on this. And the guy, he's so self-centered and he's not really caring about what his father is saying. Basically tries to off his dad and might succeed at it so he can be the benefactor. He's ripped up these forms of this property deed, and now he's on the run to this property so he can kind of get out of the limelight because his dad was just freshly killed, but he also just wants to kind of enjoy what's now his. Well, when he gets there, he notices that there's a party going on inside of the property, and this takes him back a little bit, and he's just kind of giving himself to it because he needs to take some edge off. There's some alcohol. He meets this girl, but this girl may or may not have this boyfriend. They decide to go upstairs, make out, and do their thing, but the boyfriend gets involved and comes upstairs, and let's just say the guy's forced to use his firearm that he has on the boyfriend, and then while the girl is screaming to silence her, he has to do something to her. But right after that, there's a immediate recontextualization of the entire party, and not everything is as it seems, and it ties back to the father's warning about this being just bad memories based around his life, and we find out why these people are here nonetheless, and we find out what's going to happen to the main character, and let's just say it involves some fire, and that plays into the ending of it. So yeah, this one it's a fine story. I think there's some technical aspects that I like about it more than some other ones. The characters aren't too detestable here, minus the main character, and the flashback element takes about 10 minutes or roughly around that. That kind of took me out of the first half of the episode, but once we get into the second half, when it starts to click on, the setup is fine and it's kind of intriguing, but because of the dad, dropping that this is dealing with a memory, you kind of assume that what he's stepped into might be a time paradox. But when you get to that recontextualization, this is where it loses me. This is implying that these are ghosts manifesting into physical beings, and it's just there for the sake of shock value. There's no real reason why they have physical bodies and they look like fucking corpses and zombies. There's no real fucking reason why the guy somehow could be in the past or in a past vision with all this shit. It's something that you really have to look past to kind of get what they're trying to go here. He's living in his father's shoes. He's following in his father's footsteps. And he has to relive the consequences that his father did. And this mildly plays on something like what the Kosovan curse was talking about in Tales from the Dark Side, with you have to pay the debt of your ancestors' atrocities, essentially. Right here, it's talking about your father's atrocities, but still. But that shit just, it's almost schlock for the sake of schlock. It really doesn't make much logical sense. It's just there because it's a horror story. And yeah, it's schlock for the sake of schlock. But yeah, nonetheless, entertaining enough. Feels more creep show in nature than Tales from the Crypt, but I had a decent time with it. All right. Where are we at? Number 6? I think we're at number 6. Yeah. Number 6, we have episode 69, Operation Friendship. This episode came from Tales from the Crypt number 41, and I give this a 3.25 out of 5 stars. I know this is going to get me some hate. I know this is going to get me some hate. This is one of the most hated episodes of the whole show. Look, it's dumb, it's silly, it's corny, but it's entertaining as fucking hell, right? And this is one of those concepts that I can kind of get behind. Plus, it has Tate Donovan in it. Who doesn't like fucking Tate Donovan, man? What a treasure. Tate Donovan rules. So the concept of this one is kind of weird. There is some gross humor in the story as well to kind of look past, but I thought this one, was worthy to put here. So this one's about this man. He works an office job, and he has this best friend who he talks to on a daily basis, and he comes to his apartment while his girlfriend or wife is there, but his wife can't see him. because it's an imaginary friend, let's just say. And him and his imaginary friend have polar opposite personalities. And throughout the story, the imaginary friend tries to coach him because there's something that happens in the story where the guy, kind of needs a little more pep, right, in his life, and he has to make some adjustments. I don't want to spoil exactly what it is, but let's just say it plays into this conflict that starts to brew between these two, and it builds up to a finale that one of them may or may not get erased. And by the time the ending rolls around, you realize that the ending is kind of ambiguous because there's a two-pronged message. Either there's one interpretation that the Tate Donovan's character, the main character, was a manifestation the whole time of his supposed imaginary friend's life, or vice versa, the imaginary friend just took over the psyche of the main character. Mild spoiler. That might have spoiled the whole thing for you, but I have to say it like that because it's either or. Which it's not the worst ending ever because it's pretty much a two-pronged thing. It's nothing much else. There's not too many questions left, minus that, which can be slightly annoying. But yeah, I thought this one was kind of fun. Entertaining as hell. I think the acting performances was fun. The imaginary friend character was awesome. There is that scene where he's like groping the guy's girlfriend. Why? Because it's Tales from the Crypt. And it does kind of drag at some points. It is very dialogue heavy, and I'm not going to lie. Some of the dialogue from the imaginary friend is kind of crass and hard to listen to. And the climax is very left field. A little too left field for my liking. But that feeds into the ending, and I think I like the ending, how ambiguous it is, but it is kind of mildly frustrating there as well. There's not much commentary to this. I guess you can peel back the idea that an imaginary friend is kind of like another identity somebody carries around with them, and this might be kind of trying to draw a line of symmetry between imaginary friends and dissociative identity disorder. I don't know. It's not really out there upfront about it, but that is kind of there to chew on, I guess. But yeah, I think this one's overhated. I don't know, maybe if I watch this in the future, it might go down. I don't see it going any higher than I have it right now, though. And I think I'm being plenty generous with it, so I'm fine putting it here. All right, now we're entering my top 5 of Season 6. All right, so at number 5, to round out the decent, we have episode 79. 99 and 44 out of 100% pure horror. The worst title of this entire fucking show. This comes from the Vault of Horror number 23. I gave this a 3.25 out of 5 stars. I thought the blonde chick, the main character, was hot as hell. And the concept was delightfully dark. But it's kind of like that femme fatale story that we occasionally get in the show. And it doesn't really do anything new about it. But it does have some dark comedy elements to it that I weirdly enjoyed. So yeah, this one's about this woman who's having an affair with this younger guy. She's an artist. She lives in this nice lavish apartment run by, her husband, who works at this pharmaceutical company, who uses her art on the packaging of the stuff. And the husband is pretty much very against animal testing, and all the products they use at the factory that he runs essentially have no animal products in it for a reason. And the wife kind of makes fun of that, and she has this weird thing about her where she likes to paint like real people, but like peel back their skin and see their muscles and shit. The art looks kind of cool and creepy, but why? I don't know. One day the husband kind of gets a glimpse of her infidelity and has a sinking suspicion of it, and kind of calls her out on it, and she's like, well, I want a divorce. And he's like, well, no, here's what we should do. I'm going to let you use your paintings, or I think the stipulation was beforehand, actually, that he wanted to use her paintings that she was currently doing to kind of rebrand his products and stuff, but after she went on a talk show or something and got pretty much shafted from the host about it, she was upset. And when the husband said that there's nothing much they can do about her art, I guess she was upset. So this debacle, something may or may not happen to the husband when he's trying to blackmail her. And let's just say she has to find a way to get rid of his body. And there's some comedic stuff going on with that. Like I said, darkly comedic. And throughout the story, the remainder of it at least, the husband may or may not be dead at some points. And she disposes of his body at this factory. And let's say he gets recycled into this product. And there's this running gag about her taking a shower with her husband that plays near the end. But ties back to something that the husband believed in and what he said early on in the story. And something may happen to her in the shower. Yeah, very bizarre story, but I thought it was entertaining and weirdly dark. It was kind of pushing a full-on good story. The only thing about it that just doesn't really register with me is how the animal byproducts mixed with like a generic bar of soap, for example, how that would cause a reaction on the woman's skin that we see near the end. Yeah, I mean, there's not really much sense put into that part of the story. All they say is that we don't do animal testing for ethical reasons. They don't really go into the science behind it or even offer some sort of bullshit scientific thing to throw out why. It's just there in the story, which is okay. So that's not the biggest problem ever, but a little disbelief near the end. You got to put there. I thought the story itself took a little while to click on. It didn't really get fun until the husband death or supposed death. And that's where it started to kick on and get kind of funny and weirdly dark. I was kind of hoping that this would be like a different setup by the time we got to the factory portion. But I'm not complaining too much by the end. It just didn't go the direction I thought it was going. And yeah, like there's also some hints about the wife having some sort of dark side to her. She might be like a secret sociopath or one of those femme fatale women, like I already brought up, that has, you know, if you've ever seen like a true crime documentary about like serial killers, women serial killers are like the rarest form because they just don't have like this supposed gene that most serial killers who are men has or something like that, some bullshit. You can kind of see that here in the parallels to that, but it's not that upfront about it. Yeah, and I guess this is kind of coming to talk about spousal insecurity, about, you know, the husband is more successful and has all the power and pretty much the reason for his wife's success, but when he can't provide it for her, she basically writes him off as useless. And this is tale as old as time, talking about women just using men and trying to get to their money and to their access of resources and all that. They don't marry for love, they marry for lifestyle. You can kind of see that in the story too. And she just openly cheats and doesn't give a fuck. She's not a likable person. That also kind of takes away from the story. But yeah, it ends up being decent, especially for Crypt standards. This is a Crypt decent episode. So yeah. Now we're entering the good, and we only have one entry here. This episode stars Travis Tritt and Hank Azaria, and they did fantastic in this. I actually was pleasantly surprised with this one. It's a lower good, and it's on that lower total overall good for the entire show for me, pushing that bottom. But it's still a good episode for what it is, and I was actually shocked because after weeding through all the mid, to get something like this was kind of a treat. This was episode 77, Doctor of Horror. This comes from the Vault of Horror number 13, and I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I don't know, I forget, I don't think it's Roddy McDowall in this, but the guy kind of looks like him, and I don't know why I get him confused with that guy, but I do. But like I said, Travis Tritt, who's a country singer, and he has a full-on long-ass mullet, and Hank Azaria are these two security guards working for this mortician, and the mortician's played by Ben Stein. What a cast here. And while they're working one night, they have this guy that's in the building trying to steal a cadaver. And they find the guy, and the guy's like, look, I'll pay you each this amount of money. Just keep your mouth shut and let me take this body. And he's like, I need the body now, though, because there's something urgent. And the guys are like, well, you know, if you pay us enough, you can buy us, and we'll go to wherever you're at. So he takes him down to this laboratory, some Frankenstein laboratory looking bullshit, and he puts the cadaver, and he splits open the spine, which is kind of gruesome, and he's looking for this life source that's in the spinal cord itself. And it said that the doctor, he's been trying to access this for many years, and he has many other cadavers hidden over in this freezer where he's been trying to get this done. And Hank Azaria's character is like, well, maybe we can entertain doing this full time. But Travis Tritt's character is like, no, he's like getting ill. This is wrong. He's trying to steal these people's souls. Well, the next day, after they drank and went to go talk about what they just witnessed at nearby a well, they fell asleep in their post, and their boss, Ben Stein, comes to wake them up, finds that they've been drinking, finds that their clothes are dirty, and that a cadaver is missing, and that he needs to call the cops because he thinks that they did something to the body. Well, one of them knocks the man unconscious and takes him to the doctor, and basically for the rest of the episode, they're going to basically bring him bodies so he can experiment and try to get that life force. But as the story goes along, Travis Tritt grows a conscience and says he's going to turn himself in. He's going to turn the doctor and his colleague in because his conscience can't take it anymore. And essentially, Hank Azaria's character and the doctor, they come up with this idea that maybe they need to do away with the cohort. And when they do it, they get rid of him. They decide to experiment on his body, but they're finally able to grab what the doctor's been looking for. But there's a twist involved after they dismember the body and try to dispose it down the well. That when you take somebody's soul, that doesn't necessarily mean they're gone forever. And yeah, some nice over-the-top gore, and something fucked up happens to the other two characters. And yeah, comeuppance. I like this one for it being pretty much textbook creep show. There's some thought-provoking things going on in this story, especially about like pay discrepancies and like going beyond the limits of your job description. That's just like scratching the surface. When you look at some ethical things about the doctor, him stealing souls and trying to get power, he's just a normal man. But you see the struggle with Travis Tritt's character and how that plays into the idea of do man have what it takes to possess a soul? And there's so many unknowns in the story, and I think what it means to possess a soul was very poignantly put, especially by that over-the-top ending, because they had no idea what they're getting themselves into, and kind of plays into knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know as well. Yeah, you know, some substance to pull back with this one. Yeah, it's an enjoyable one. Does have some logic you got to put it out at the door because it's schlock. This is a schlock story, over the top for the sake of it. Yeah, and the concept of the soul, it's fiction, so it works, but it doesn't really ever go into too much depth to why the guy's looking for it. He just wants to see if he can find it. The soul gland. Okay. Okay. We're just gonna roll with it. So yeah, that's why it's a low good. It's just a little eyebrow raising, but it's fun enough. Now in the top three, these are my three favorites from this season. We have episode 67, Only Skin Deep. This comes from Tales from the Crypt number 38, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. This is the first of the 3 very good episodes. Only Skin Deep, not to be confused with Only Sin Deep from season 1, is a very creepy story. It's iconic. I think it's a fan favorite too, but for understandable reasons. It's very simple. This man, he is at a costume party. He meets this woman with like a white mask. Him and her hit it off. She seems kind of strange, but he ends up at her place. And after schmoozing her and talking with her, he ends up having sex with her. And afterwards, she's like, well, I don't think we should get connected, but he seems like to be kind of into her. And it seems kind of touching, but there's something really off about this woman. And as the guy is going around her apartment, he's seeing visions of people manifesting like with like vibrating heads and shit. It's kind of creepy as hell. He finds some rooms with like drawers of people like with no name documents being sent to her. And then he ends up finding a room with like body parts in it. And he's like, what the fuck is going on? And the woman's like, well, that's why I didn't want to get too close to you. You're going to find out the truth like they all the others. And he's like, well, just take the mask off. Come on, just take it off. And she's like, no, don't do it. And he tries to rip it off. But the twist is, let's just say the mask might end up being her face. And after that happens, the climax unfolds. And yeah, the story ends on a dark note in that mild Texas Chainsaw Massacre type of way. Yeah, the only negative I really have with the story, it involves the woman's face. It's so unbelievable that it's kind of insulting to intelligence, the twist they try to pull with that. But other than that, I thought this one was genuinely creepy. It had a good atmosphere. The character interactions were different for this show. It was engaging. You don't really hate the main character. You kind of feel bad for what happens to him, and you believe in his emotions and his sincerity towards this woman. And yeah, even the woman, she's kind of likable for what she is. There's some story about getting to know people for who they are on the inside, but sometimes the insides are almost as ugly as the outside. And you kind of see the ramifications of somebody and the mental health of somebody who's been told by society throughout their whole life that they're inadequate or they're not up to standard, and how that can play into their psyche as they grow older, and how that might birth some sociopathic tendencies or somebody who's just batshit insane. And I really do like this season overall for having like female murderers. I thought that this was fun for that, but easily one of the best ones. So yeah, really like this story. Very good. Now, at number 2, we have episode 78, Comes the Dawn. This comes from The Haunt of Fear, number 26. And I also gave this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. This one, it's vampires in Alaska, baby. Just like 30 Days of Night. But this is definitely different enough from that to make it stand out. And I just love the story for how creepy it is and how different it is. So these two explorers, they're in Alaska. They're hunting big game. They end up at this hotel, encounter this woman with really bad teeth. And she ends up like trying to call the police on them, and they silence her by like essentially killing her because she kind of pretended to be this person that they're after. And the person that they're after may or may not have this military background and might be close in the area to where they can help them find this game. So they end up finding this person's house, and she's in there by herself. And she's like, oh yeah, I served in this war that y'all served in. And he's like, well, I was one of your superiors. Are you going to listen to what I said? And she's like, yeah, I'll lead you to whatever you guys are hunting. So she takes him out to this area. They go hunting for a little bit. Meanwhile, the woman and the guy's like lackey end up maybe kindling up a romance connection. But there's something off about the story. Once the other guy comes back and the girl kind of disappears, they notice something odd going on. And there's a bombshell. Once they hear some weird noises going on outside, they end up in this room, and they find a bunch of like skin hanging from the ceiling that end up possibly being vampires. And there's a twist behind the woman and what these people possibly did or affected her during the war, and why she's so pissed off, and basically what's going to happen to these men moving forward. So yeah, Comes the Dawn. Creepy ass story, entertaining as hell. I love the snowy atmosphere. I love the concept of having vampires in Alaska or somewhere where there's prolonged spouts of night. As a matter of fact, I think that's the twist to the story, and I'm assuming that that's what inspired Steve Niles. I think that's the writer who wrote 30 Days of Night. I think this story possibly inspired that, if I'm willing to bet. The monster effects look great. There's great morals to the story about wartime atrocities and affecting the lives of the people beneath you, and how you need to set a good example, and how that trickles down when these soldiers get back into civilian life. And there's also parallels to the woman of how that affects her and her fitting into where she lives. There's some costs with that, and war takes away things from you. Yeah, I like that idea. So yeah, great episode. Not great, but very good episode. Not as very good as my number one, which is my absolute favorite from this season. We have episode 80, You Murderer. This is from Shock Suspense Stories number 14, and I gave this a 4.25 out of 5 stars. This is the last of the Robert Zemeckis episodes, and honestly, I love this episode to pieces. This was the only episode in the show to be told in entirely first person. It was using Forrest Gump technology to overimpose Humphrey Bogart, of all people. They had a voice actor come in and like pretend to be his voice, but they actually had like images of Humphrey Bogart to be the character of the story, which I thought was cool. And it has John Lithgow in it. But the concept of this one is very cool. So it's like a noir story. The story starts off with a guy in a car accident. He explains that he's dead, but he kind of goes back in first person of the events of how he died. And throughout the story, you get this sense that he's like this executive guy, but he might have had plastic surgery to cover up his criminal past. And the guy who performed the plastic surgery may or may not be two-timing him by being with his wife, and they have this idea to essentially off the man. And he learns that later in the story, and let's just say something happens to the man. They try to dispose of his body in a grave somewhere, but let's just say fate has some weird powers and does something to them, and it ties back to the beginning of the story, and gives that recontextualization moment to what happened. So yeah, this one was just entertaining as hell. I love first-person stories. The acting in this was fantastic. The concept really landed. This reminds me of a black and white noir film called Lady in the Lake, and I love the style of that movie, and I love it here. Now some of the visual effects are kind of dated, and yeah, the plot isn't too special. It's all about the delivery and the presentation of this one. It's just engaging as hell, and it's fun, and that's why I love it, and that's why it's my favorite of season 6. There is some messages about, you know, trying to hide your identity. You know, the past always comes to haunt you, and be careful who you trust. Simple stuff, but it works fine and splendidly well. So yeah, that's my thoughts on season 6 of Tales from the Crypt. Let me know down in the comment section if you agree with my takes, if you disagree. How would you rank this season? What were your favorite episodes? What were your least favorite episodes? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.